Hey Jared, man, welcome to the pod.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Sure. This is interesting. So I messaged you. So I messaged a bunch of my friends, and I messaged you to like come to the pod, and you were like, you responded within like a few minutes. This was like really really interesting. Um, so you, am I correct that you're the founder of Renga?
Yeah, that's correct.
Cool, cool. Could you tell me like what's the story behind Renga? And just like what inspired you to start this company?
Yeah, for sure. So Renga's a brand strategy and design studio. Really, we help a lot of different businesses help like understand who they are, where they want to go, and how to communicate that properly through copywriting and visuals. And so our bread and butter is really like brand strategy, visual identity design, and providing ongoing design support. And so, yeah, I mean, it's an atypical story for starting a an agency. I'd never worked at an agency before, and I'm not a designer. So
Hmm.
starting a design agency was definitely a choice. And I think like ultimately for me, I started my first business when I was 17. And in that time, when your friends around you have seen that you've been running a business for like 20 minutes, they think you're an expert at it and they come and tell you all their business ideas. And I learned really quick like that was actually my favorite thing to do was to hear about all of their ideas and help them understand how all those little small micro decisions really affected the macro. And, I worked at Shopify for a bit in 2015 and got to talk with a lot of entrepreneurs. And I just knew that I would be working with entrepreneurs in some way at some point. And yeah, just decided when I was at like a hi-fi audio company, I was kind of parallel processing a branding project as the same time as an agency was doing another one of their in-house brands, and they were paying me like $37,000 a year. And then I found out they paid the agency $500,000 to do the campaign, and
Wow.
it was like the day I found out how much they got paid, I quit because I was just like, I'm doing what felt like a better job than what these guys were doing at the time, and so yeah, left that day and just kind of like did a bit of everything, kind of jack of all trades, master of none, saved up enough to start building a team and specializing in brand.
Cool, cool. That's awesome, man. You mentioned that you're not a designer, but like
Mm,
one of the things that's kind of a bit confusing for me is that like how like whenever we're talking about branding, there's also
mm,
a discussion around design, and it seems like these two
mm,
are very closely tied together. So what do you think like this like is branding just design or like what's
mm.
what's the difference here?
Yeah. So I think I would define it if a brand is how you are perceived. So your brand is how others perceive you, right? And visuals is a really big part of that. For me, a good brand is when the company's intention matches that perception, right? And so all of that is just communication. It's about how a business communicates who they are and what they are about to their not only their customers but to their investors, to their employees, and everybody else. And so, your brand is really what represents that feeling that all these people have. It's that perception that everybody has, and visuals are a big part of it. But so is copywriting, and so is a lot of different stuff. And so, the type of work that we do, like we like to talk a lot about how brand is actually a compass for internal decision making, right? Like there's ways to make decisions for short-term cash flow, there's ways to make it for EBITDA, and then there's actually like brand first decision making, right? Which is really a rootedness in who you are and what you're about, and then how that goes forward. And so how visuals connect to it, the way that we talk about it is like once you're clear on who you are and you understand how people are like who you're speaking to, the visual expression and the written expression is a big part of your brand.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, that kind of makes sense. Um, so so when a company comes to you and they want help with their branding, what is the exact step-by-step thing that you do
Mm,
to basically help them with branding. And I want you to even like go to the details. Just don't skip anything. Just like exactly what do you do?
Yeah. So, I mean, we call our process brand therapy, and it feels like therapy, a lot of it.
Mhm.
It it's going to start with a lot of discovery. We really start with that strategy side of stuff and really make sure that we're like discovering everything we can. I think like so much of why I started this agency in the first place was being on the client side. And a lot of agencies come in with this almost like a savior complex, and they like kind of just crap all over everything that you have before. They then arrive with like their own on trend solution, and then basically say good luck with it, or hold you hostage by like saying, oh, we're going to do it and pay us a maintenance fee for ongoing, right? And the word Renga itself and the name behind it, it's a type of like collaborative Japanese poetry that is really like a group of poets who would write a 3-line stanza, then the next poet would write a 2-line stanza, and then the next poet would write a 3-line stanza connecting to that 2-line, and it would just daisy chain these poems that we would know as haikus today. And this like ongoing collaboration for me was a really beautiful representation of what agency world should be, that we need to arrive in this process with listening. We want to discover what is going on. Why did you start this business in the first place? Starting a business is so hard.
It is.
Why did
Yeah.
you choose to do it? Why did you go about doing that? What were those moments of inspiration? And then how have things evolved? How have things continued to move forward? Where like so many founders have that initial inspiration, and then they're A/B testing their life away until they get product market fit. Then they get product market fit, and they're like, okay, well now we need to do marketing. What do we talk about? Like we've just been on this journey, and like we've kind of veered away from that original purpose a little bit because we've just been so focused on making sure we got product market fit. But now like we need to do marketing, and now we're building up our team, and people are describing our business differently. And like ultimately, like we're just not proud of how we're showing up in all these places. We don't know what's wrong with it, but we know that it's not clear. And so really our mission of doing that discovery is to create internal clarity and alignment. The ultimate thing that we bring, I think, is that clarity and alignment for internal decision making, so that you know product, marketing, and sales are all speaking the same language. They're all on the same page, and they're building from the same foundation. And so we do this quote unquote therapy work of really diving into the details of what the founders want, what they get excited about, what the business needs, where the business is going, and how all of those things intermix and intertwine with each other to really form that identity of who your business is. And once we're clear on that, then it's like, yeah, let's try and understand your customers. Who are you guys speaking to? What do they care about? Who else is trying to speak to them? Like, let's just understand the landscape of how we're talking. And I think like what would maybe make us a little atypical is a lot of branding studios fully focus on that market research, customer positioning, and build a brand to carve out a white space within that. I pay that a lot less attention than the self identity, because you have no control over that and that social component, right? You have no control over your customers. You have no control over your competition. That is constantly evolving. What actually makes a brand stand the test of time and have it built for longevity is the rootedness in its self-awareness and its own identity. And so once we have that and have a picture of the social awareness, then it's about, okay, how does that actually show up visually? How does that show up in writing? How do we actually show up in product and in on a website and all of those different components? The rest of that is then communication. So we have our self-awareness, we have our social awareness, and then the rest is just communication, right? And it's just this perpetual ongoing cycle of reevaluation.
Cool, cool. So you basically start with discovery, and then what you describe as like, doing a bit of competitor research, and also just self-identity work. So during this process, like so you started this company for since when?
I, I first started 2017, but started hiring people in 2019. So
2019. I do want to get to hiring in a minute, but
yeah.
um So maybe just now. So how many people are in your company right now?
Yeah, right now we're 6 full time with a bunch of contractors. In COVID, we grew pretty aggressively to 15 and made a bunch of killer mistakes that, yeah, I'm happy to chat about.
Yeah, yeah. I wanted to talk about and just ask you about like what is your approach in hiring
Mm,
now in hindsight, and also like first
mm.
what it was, and then what was your key learnings during the process?
Yeah, I think when we were growing and building our reputation, the simple business math of agency model is you're selling hours, right? So it's a pretty linear business. The amount of hours that you have available is the amount of hours you can, excuse me, the amount of hours that you can sell, and supply demand, right? Like it's really that simple. And so the instinct is then to go, okay, well, we have no supply left. We have no hours. We're fully booked up. We better hire so that we can grow this business and make more money. And we invested all like profit and extra cash into growing headcount pretty aggressively. And having not worked in agency world, I didn't trust the people that I spoke to when they said this whole industry is really feast or famine. And in my mind, I went, well, the fact that we're new and growing should transcend the famine side of stuff, right? Because people are just starting to learn about us. So that's fine. We don't need a huge war chest to like weather the storm because like we're awesome. We're growing. People are just finding out about us. We're going to just keep growing like gangbusters. Very optimistic. And for the most part, that was proving to be true for a while, right? And we ended up being approached by one of the big banks to do like a small, fun little project, and we crushed it. And they then came to us and were like, "Okay, here's all the work we want you guys to do this next year." And they pitched us like 4 or 5 projects for us to work on. And we were scoping it all out, looking at it. We're like, "Okay, this is like minimum 600K, probably max 1 point." Went 8 months with them through all the legal of getting in the appropriate like vendor agreements, all that stuff, staffed up to fulfill it because it started like looking like it was actually going to be at the top end of that range. And 2 weeks before kickoff, hey, here's your new point of contact. Um, After one meeting, he went, yeah, I think I'm just going to do this all in-house. So that worst case scenario of 600K went to zero really fast. And we had staffed up to do this. And being the ever optimist that I was, I went, okay, I'm not going to lay anybody off because we've just ramped everybody up. I'll just figure it out and make this work. And personally floated payroll for a while and put myself into way too much debt. And this was also then right as the economy started turning. So then we entered the famine cycle, and it just like really got into a bad situation. And it kind of all ultimately kind of accumulated to a spot where I had racked up a bunch of debt and needed to do some hard stuff. And in the same day, um, I had to lay off over half my team. My wife told me she was leaving because she had been saying, don't do this, don't do this, don't do this all the time. And I'm like, it's fine, it's fine, it's fine. And I got a bill from the CRA for like $200,000 at the all in the same day. And that was a heavy day. And so I think like the key message that I've had to anybody who's asked about agency, it's like appreciate, like hire slowly, like use contractors, like the cost, like, yes, you can make way better margin by having full-time employees, but like the flexibility that happens with contractors is so important. And so since we've gone down to 6 at that time, like our entire growth has been in through contractors and yeah, just building really great reputation with them.
Man, this was so interesting. So I cannot imagine like this thing happening to me. It's so difficult. Um, just I mean maybe a naive question, but what is
Mm.
like I've heard that people say like, you know, just you like doing working with contractors is a
Uh,
lot more flexible.
uh,
What it is that makes like having employees, like in-house employees, more difficult? Like you
uh.
have to pay them severance or like and
Yeah,
also like
yeah, you have to pay them severance, and they expect a paycheck every 2 weeks, right? Like, so, and it's not like a dial it up, dial it back. Like you make someone an employment offer, and that's like a contract with an indefinite term length, right? Versus like most contractor agreements are conditional based upon completing the work, or
Mhm.
there's termination clauses. There's a whole bunch of different ways to kind of get out of it. And it, your reputation of, for me to say to a contractor, hey, sorry, the client ghosted us, we're not doing the work anymore, is really normal for an employee who's just like potentially left another full-time job to come and join you, to be like, oh, hey, the client like ghosted us, so we're not hiring you anymore. I know you just started, you're not going to get a paycheck this week. I don't know, I'll let you know when work comes through. Like, it's just a way different expectation set, right? And it, I think like the misnomer that I had was, because we were approaching our work quite a bit differently than say other agencies, that I assumed it would take a much longer ramp up period for someone to kind of adopt into our philosophy. And I think that was just me getting a little too high on my own supply of like our point of differentiation. Like, there are really important differentiations and philosophies and nuances to how it goes through. But at the end of the day, like, it's it a lot of the task based work is still pretty similar across the board, right? And so yeah, the philosophy and how I speak about it on this podcast, about how we set up a project, about how we build our own internal metrics and culture, are unique, and it is important, but it was not worth paying people to just sit there and wait while I went to try and find work.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, cannot imagine. It's pretty stressful. Like you have to like find clients to be able to basically make up for that contract which is terminated. Um so um so how do you work with some clients that are, you know, like you have a vision for their brand and they kind of trust you in some way because they hired you, but they also have their own opinions and sometimes it might not match yours. You know, you might have conflicts. So like, have you had that
Uh,
happen to you? And also, like, how do you resolve that?
yeah, I think like what you're speaking about is the classic freelancer dilemma, and really what we've shared with some of the people that we've hired who were freelancers before. It's like, hey, I'll handle that part with you, because those are the hard conversations when you're worried, when the client's telling you to do something that you know is wrong with your expertise, but it might be the difference of you buying groceries or not. Like, it's hard to stick up for what you have, right? And so this is where I provide a lot more protection for my creative team in saying like, hey, if you're hiring us to be experts, trust our expertise. At the end of the day, this is client services. So we will do what you tell us to do, but you better believe that we're going to communicate that we don't think it's a good idea for these reasons, and communicate our expertise and share what we think is better. And if at the end of the day you say, hey, thanks for that information, I still want you to do this. Okay, we're in client services. They are paying us to do this task. And there have been projects like that where we were really excited by where things were going. And, you know, halfway through, a client kind of took over and viewed us more as pixel pushers than partners. And the result fell flat. Like, we still did our best with what we could, but like fundamentally the concepts behind it were just kind of flawed. And we could see some of those things. Like, when someone's hiring you to be a partner, it's because you've made all of those mistakes before yourself, right? Like, they're paying a premium to you because they want to learn from your hard-earned lessons. And if they don't let you bring that wisdom into the project, then it's just a poor use of resources from their side.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. Can you so so I've been going through your Renga's page on X, and I've seen a bunch of like cool branding projects that you guys accomplished. Um, one of the products that you helped with their branding was Humi, which I use. Not I use,
Yeah.
I mean in my company. And
Yeah.
it's a great product.
Yeah.
Can you share some like success stories that you've had, um, especially if um the company that you help with their branding, they also had a bad experience with another agency.
Uh,
Um, yeah, if you know, like if you have this success cases, I would love to know about it.
yeah. I mean, I think all of the best projects that we've done, whether it's, Humi or Float or Three Ships or some of these brands that are a little bit more well known in kind of the Canadian tech ecosystem, it's the value of the way the strategy changed the decision making internally that has been the biggest difference. I remember the COO of Humi, like halfway through the project, it was a very big project that we did at the beginning of this year. Um, After we had kind of done the strategy work, he said to me, he's like, if you never did visuals, this was worth the investment. And that for me is the biggest testament to the type of work that we've done. And I think like it's not to sewer any other agency, it's just a different philosophy, right? Like we have done work for brands. There's a fragrance brand who called Henry Rose, and owned by a celebrity. They paid $500,000 to one of the Brooklyn-based agencies to do a beautiful design, and they created a beautiful, beautiful brand. But we worked with them on like a fundraising deck for like the storytelling side of stuff, and we showed them one of the brand guidelines that we've done, and the strategy section was 50, 60 pages about how the business should operate and all these things. And they went, this isn't how our brand guideline looks. Like, it's like 3 or 4 pages of strategy, like it, and the visuals are beautiful and excellent. But like where we are struggling now is we're a year out of these visuals and we kind of don't know where to go from here. We don't know how to approach copy. We don't know how to approach our own value proposition. We don't know how to tie all of these common threads together to ensure there's something cohesive. Sure, it can visually look good, but conceptually and through written, like we're just not there. And so we had to go in and build them a full brand strategy, right? And it's not that it's a bad experience with one of these other studios. It's just, I would say it's incomplete, right? I think a lot of people view branding as visuals only, and they view it as I receive a map that tells me what to do whenever I encounter a situation. That gives me the rules and the guidelines to follow to get to brand, to get to on brand. And I think like viewing a brand guideline and a brand as a map is just fundamentally flawed. We like to view it as a compass because the reality is you will get tossed off course. The reality is a new platform like TikTok will come out and you don't have that in your brand guidelines because it doesn't exist. Or, just something changes in the landscape that all of a sudden your map is out of date. And when you use brand as a compass, it allows you to say like, no matter where I get tossed in the air, no matter where I get thrown off course, I know how to reorient myself towards where I'm going and figure out the right path based upon where I am and how the landscape has changed with me. And so I think that is where we see the biggest impact in a lot of the companies we work with. And Humi, for example, they've grown quickly. They've been through a lot of places, and you'd go inside and we did a lot of like internal stakeholder interviews of sales and marketing and product. And it was a lot of disconnection, a lot of people who believed similar things, but were using different words and using different priorities. And what needs to happen is that structure needs to happen at the bottom, and you need from top down leadership to create that foundation that everybody then can build the second layer on. So we went in and built that core foundation of who is Humi and what is Humi about. And then product built something on top of that, and sales built something on top of that, and marketing built something on top of that. And the excitement and clarity and alignment that happens when you know you're all building on top of the same foundation is, it makes such a fundamental difference. Unfortunately, there is not like a clear metric that I can, as the seller of brand, say, hey, here's our metric to say like the ROI on brand is happening. It's just one of those things that once you've experienced it, it's hard to imagine doing it another way.
Yeah. When you were talking about the core layer, I think I was reading this message. Maybe you can share that little story that you wanted to add emojis to Humi. I think something like that, or like statuses. And can you
Yeah.
tell
So
me the story of that?
yeah. Yeah. So we built them a Humoji system. So one of the things, so Humi is an employment platform. They really deal with HR, payroll, benefits, basically the humans within your business. And when you're speaking about human things, we did a lot of landscape research, and every HR company sounded very similar. And it's a lot of stock photography of smiles and camaraderie and teamwork and high fives. And that's just like not how businesses work. Um, and I think like part of the derivative of the word Humi is human, and their logo is like inspired by a fingerprint. And when we were like doing some of the research, one of our creative directors, she started asking us like, oh, hey, did you guys do fingerprint puppets when you were kids? And when we were like, no, I don't know what you're talking about. And she started showing us all of these fingerprint puppets where you put your finger in ink, you stamp it, and you draw faces on it. And that really kind of inspired a huge part of this visual identity direction, where we took the shape of their logo, which was similar to like a fingerprint, and really built this huge range of expressive faces and action lines. And we built them like this comprehensive Humoji builder that allowed them to express the wide range of human emotions, with it being fine. Like, when was the last time you saw stock photography of someone angry or someone upset or someone confused that didn't look like it was obviously stock photography in an unironic way? And I think like this is where Humojis really gave us this opportunity to express some of those emotions with visuals. And yeah, like they kind of took it and ran with it. And I know everyone internally, like we have a shared Slack channel with them, and it's like people are changing their Slack profiles like almost daily based on like how they're feeling in those moments, and kind of using that wide range and seeing how, yeah, like if it's the same face with a different color, it feels different. The same face with like the same color, but with like an action line can start to feel different, like different eyes, different eyebrow expressions. Like there was pretty granular on what you could kind of change in there. And it was a really fun system to build.
Cool. Yeah. So you mentioned pitch decks, and one of the things that I've noticed is that I would say most branding companies that I've seen, they do branding, like they don't do pitch decks much. What exactly does a does Renga do in pitch decks? I'm kind of curious
Yeah.
about that.
Yeah. No, you're definitely right. Not many branding studios do pitch decks. And part of the reason why we do them is we really pride ourselves on our storytelling. Kind of what we talked about in terms of the belief of, I know that when you work with us, we are able to help you reposition and understand your own business in such a different way, and help you communicate it through copy and conceptually. And when I say we're really great storytellers, it's kind of like New York's best cup of coffee. You don't believe me until you experience it, because you don't, it's so hard to see the before and after of stories, right? Like, it's easy to see the before and afters of visual design. It's hard to understand the before and afters and those like mental unlocks and reframes of how that really helps. And so one of my personal superpowers is actually writing pitch deck narratives to help companies raise VC funds. And everyone who comes to us for a pitch deck, most of the time they're coming for us to design something beautiful. But I know 90% of the value we create is actually in how we reframe that story. And I mean, now that we've done enough of them, people come to us for the storytelling too. But yeah, like I mean, I could rant for a long time on the philosophy of how I approach pitch decks, but it's one of those things that it lets us flex our storytelling chops a little bit to show the impact of like how reframing how you communicate your business can make all the difference.
Cool. Yeah. Um, so, so how does the whole like branding industry, I don't know if industry is a right word for it, but just like doing branding, how did it change over the past, let's say, 20 years, 10 years,
Mm.
and what state it is right now? What are the new trends?
Yeah, I don't know if I feel super qualified to answer it, honestly. I think like so much of what, like I said, like I had no agency background, and a lot of what we've been doing has been just focusing on working with the clients we've had and following our intuition and following our gut. Yeah, truthfully, I haven't been a great student of the industry at large. I think like the best and most timeless branding studios continue to be at the top of the game because they understand the importance of the deep thinking. They know that design takes time, and it's way more than the visual side of stuff. And I think like what you're seeing in the big change is there is a lot more designers available to make something that looks pretty compelling. And so I think like on the surface, it's gotten more competitive from a design perspective, and you could throw AI in that as well in terms of like its ability to create and generate imagery. Part of the reason why we call our process brand therapy is like it is about asking those questions under the question. Like I have no problem showing everybody our entire process, because it's like it's not about the steps. It's about the listening and connecting and taking that time to uncover new things and reframe for people. And so it's, yeah, probably not a super scalable business in terms of like, build it into a logo factory. I think the agencies that were more of those logo factories and much more execution based are going to be replaced by things like generative AI, because it's like it it's hey, give us the inputs and based on that we'll create outputs, and that's exactly how these LLMs work, right? And so I mean, I think there's probably a reality where everything that we do could also be enhanced and obscured by some of that stuff, but I think it'll be a lot slower. And yeah, I think like that's probably the big shift, is the amount of supply and the tooling as well. Like it's the ability to use things like Webflow and Figma and Framer and all of these, and even Midjourney and all this stuff that's coming through. Like it's exciting to see how accessible the tools are becoming and the education is becoming for teaching other people. And so, yeah, you're seeing a huge supply of amazing designers and creatives. And I don't know, it gets me excited, but yeah.
Yeah. So you mentioned AI. Is there any like AI any specific AI tools that you use in your agency apart from, I mean, obvious ones like ChatGPT or like maybe Midjourney?
We don't actually use Midjourney at all. Partly because I think everyone on the team is like pretty anti-AI, except for me in general. I definitely like use ChatGPT and Claude a lot as my thought partners in helping flesh things out. Like I'm very much a verbal processor, and to have a thought partner that I could just constantly bounce things off of has been super invaluable. Yeah, it's a funny relationship. My wife, like, yeah, she laughs at me because I'm like, my best friend is Claude now. But it's yeah, I think, I don't know. I'm sure there's a lot of good AI tools that I'm not aware of. I I haven't paid too much attention outside of how it helps me expedite my processing my thinking and doing some of that stuff. We haven't really dove into it too much. On the creative, I'm super open to understanding how it could work, but I just haven't had the time to learn.
Yeah, 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 that makes sense. A bit of a tangent. So you mentioned, like, to me, it feels like challenges that a CEO of an agency goes through is kind of unique. So what is like, so when you start a company, like you normally the path is usually like to either exit or IPO. What does like an agency owner do? Like what does it, you just scale and get like higher ticket
I mean,
projects, and what is it?
I think I think the your your summary of like what is standard, it would be like that's standard for the tech world, right? I think it's pretty atypical for business at large in general, right? Like I think there are a lot of businesses that generate cash flow and
Yeah,
rely on cash flow generation, right? And I think an agency is very similar. It's a services business the same way that an accounting firm is or a law firm, and it's about improving and increasing processes and being able to generate profit and free cash flow to either buy a boat or invest into new cool things, right? And so, I mean, yeah, because we work in the tech startup space, like it's so easy to get lured into some of the, yeah, some of those tricks. And that's honestly what happened with, like, I'm working with only VC backed companies, and it's talking about headcount, and we're aggressively growing headcount because that's like a cool vanity metric to say and blah, blah, blah. But then I was like, mine's a cash flow generating business that only relies on profit. Like, I'd way rather have a $2 million a year agency that does 750 in profit than a $10 million agency that does 1 million in profit. Like, it's, the headache is like, sure, you get an extra $250,000, but the headache is not worth that in my mind. And so that's where it's like, I think it's just about understanding the game that you're in and not trying to play someone else's game. And that's what I fell victim to for sure.
yeah, yeah. I agree that my perspective of the world uh is mostly like in tech.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm wrong here. So what is your advice for, let's say, a product guy
Yeah.
or I guess a CEO who wants to like really improve their branding, but they
Mm,
don't want to hire, like they don't want to go
yeah.
all in. Like what is the 80/20 here? Um,
Yeah. I mean, it's probably doing the deep work of like going to personal therapy would probably be a pretty good step, truthfully. Like, it's one of those things where it's like so much of the work that we do is helping founders differentiate their personal identity to their business's identity and that brand. Because so often, the classic story for like a lot of tech founders is they grow the business, they grind, they work towards an exit, and they're not quite there, but they're burnt out. So they take an acquisition that's like an acqui-hire, and they can add acquired to their Twitter bio, but it wasn't actually like a meaningful like exit that's changed their life. And then they got a job and they're kind of unhappy. And it's just like, yeah, I got acquired. Like, and, but you didn't really feel like it was a win. And I think like when you so closely tie your identity and your worth to the business's identity and the business's worth, it either is going to limit your ability to invite the right people in to help you grow the business in an appropriate way, or you will feel trapped in where you were and feel an inability to grow and evolve as a human being because it would have huge impacts on your business. And so like, you need an exit, then you'll go figure out how to like get healthy or have good relationships or any of those things. And so I think like the 80-20 is honestly just asking yourself, how do I want this business to be perceived? And are the actions of our internal rhythms and rituals and the stuff that we are putting out, is our customer experience, is our product experience, is all of that, is that close to how we are intending? Do we have a plan to move it that way outside of, yeah, we'll do it once we raise the next round? Like the decisions we make every day continue to build up and add and build our brand. And you can't trick people anymore. Like what you want your brand to be, the values, the mission statement you put on the wall, the thing that you do, if they are not lived in everything that you do as a business, your employees will know it, and that will eventually leak out to your customers knowing it, and then you will have something you are no longer proud of. And so I think it's just really honesty of, who do I want this business to be? Where does this business go? And are the things we're doing aligned with how we are intending that to come across?
It's so interesting that you didn't mention about like having these, shiny illustrations and designs. It's just like going high level and like, what do you want to be? What do you want your brand to
Yeah.
be perceived? Yeah, that's
Yeah.
so interesting.
Because it's like, sure, we want to be seen as like high tech and like deep tech. Cool. Make it dark mode and purple. Like, is that the thing? Is that really what it's going to be? Like, you probably also don't want to be seen as like, if you really wanted to see as a clear innovator who is like pushing the boundaries, that's the last thing you would do. Right? Like, because that's what everyone else is doing. And so it's like, how do you want to come across? And then are your actions actually aligned with it? And then be honest with how you want to come across. Like, yeah, purpose-driven organizations, I think, are right. Like, I think there is a really good way to build a good business that does good in the world. But if that's a line for you to say because you should say it and it's a checkbox, don't make it part of your brand, because everyone will know that it's BS and that you don't mean it. And then you're tricking customers or tricking employees, and they'll get disgruntled and they're not there. If you want to just do a high performance organization that's about like working really hard and building and making cash, like make your internal like culture that, because it will be that whether you say it out loud or not, but at least saying it out loud is going to attract like-minded people.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. So you alluded to this during our conversation, but more explicitly, what would be your advice for agency owners in particular, design agency owners, web developer, like web design agency owners and also like branding. Um, how did you like I mean, you mentioned about like, contractor, like you prefer them versus like employees and whatnot. Do you have like any like similar advice like this for agency owners?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's ultimately know the game you're playing, right? Like, profit is winning, profit is freedom, profit is the end game in this. And all the other vanity metrics of top line revenue and headcount and all those things, like they are ways to increase profit, but they should always be levers that you're pulling to get more versus the core thing that you're trying to hit. And I think it's like, you gotta, it's not just profit, because I hear that and then I go, okay, someone's going to say, well, I'll hire the employee because there'll be a lower per hour cost instead of the contractor. Like, this business lives or die by cash flow. And so like, it's get 6-12 months of cash on hand as fast as possible, grow slowly, be able to weather the storm. Because if you don't have the profit, the treasury, the ability to do this, you are going to be forced to take on work that you don't want. You're going to be forced to take on clients that you don't want, and you're going to be miserable. And so I think like prioritizing the business and your peace of mind is the most important thing. And I've actually spoken to a lot of freelancers who have so much work and so much demand, and they assume the next natural thing is to start an agency. And I've talked a lot of them out of it, because it's like, well, what? Like, do you love being the tactician that's like actually executing on the work? Yeah, cool. You will be a manager and a salesperson if you start an agency. Like, that's just the reality of what you're going to become. And so if you don't want to become head of sales and everyone's manager, don't start an agency. Just charge more as a freelancer so that you can take 3 months off whenever you want a year and work in bursts. Like, it's about understanding what you actually want, what game that you're playing, and make sure that you always stick to playing that game, because it's so easy to get seduced by podcasts, to get seduced by reels and say like, this is what you should be doing. They don't know. They don't know your situation.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, makes sense. Um, all right, man. What's just wrapping it up? What's next for Renga? Are there any like exciting projects coming, or like any expansions do you have in mind, or just like growing, just like keep growing the way you're doing now?
Yeah, I think it's continuing to do more in-depth, meaningful projects like what we did with Yumi, right? Like, it was to have the ability to dive in deep and really get our hands in and make meaningful impact in an organization like that is what we want to just continue to do more of. And so I think for us, it's like, yeah, continuing to do that, continuing to help shape brands. And I mean, yeah, personally, it's like I've recently decided to embrace it and start making content and sharing some of our process and doing some of this. So I've been doing that for the last few weeks. And yeah, I would love to have like more conversations like this, go on more podcasts. And yeah, I think like our team just does such great work. And it's, for me, been a realization that like my lack of marketing and sharing what we've done is not doing their work. It's doing their work a disservice. And so, yeah, for me, I'm just like fully focused on spreading the word about how amazing my team is and the amazing work that they do, and continuing to dive deep with some really cool companies.
Yeah, it kind of feels like I've definitely noticed this. When you're like heads down doing work, there's this feeling that like you don't feel like sharing that. You don't feel like doing marketing. you just want to build, you just want to do the work. And yeah, I kind of get your feeling of like, it's, but I think if you get the ball rolling, it'll become easier.
It's so easy to hide in the work. And I've talked to my team this time about like, hey, I'm doing this push. It's working. Don't let me get back in the work, because I've done this in the past where I've done my big sprint, generated a bunch of business, and then gone, well, I can't do that marketing stuff anymore. I just got to go heads down and work. And then you like come up for air after finishing the project and you're like, oh man, like we need the work after that. And then you're like trying to get it started again. And it's tough to get the flywheel going again. Right. And so I think it's like, yeah, it's just continue to invest in business development in a cash flow sensitive business like agencies. Like it's been a hard year for agencies. Like I've spoken to a lot of agencies that have had a hard time, and it's always that. It's filling the pipeline, it's predictability of cash flow. Those are the common things that sink a client services business. So always invest in it.
Yeah. Yeah. All right, man. Thanks really for coming up to the pod. This was my very first episode of my very first pod. So,
Amazing.
yeah, I'm honored to have you here. Um, yeah, where should people go if they want to keep up to date with what you're doing and just Renga
Yeah.
in general?
Yeah. It's at Jared Henriques on all platforms. Yeah. I don't know. Maybe it's in the show notes or the description or however this works.
Yeah. 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 Cool. Cool. Thanks, man. Yeah. I guess that's a wrap. Yeah.
Thanks for
Let's
having
wrap
me.
it up. Yeah, sure. My pleasure.